Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast. We bring you stories and you bring us little digital listens. I'm Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to recap our story. This is our recap episode, guys. We're talking about The Gods Are Among Us, or The Gods Are Here. What did I call the episode? The Gods Are Among Us? I always forget. The Gods Are Here. Do you guys have any initial thoughts about what you liked about this series or not?
Well, I like the introduction of the champions. You know, Haggai, and and how they would like choose a champion to fight to see who would be the lead village for the next deal. Yeah,
I felt this. So I'm currently reading Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which I've typically not been a Brandon Sanderson fan, but I'm trying my best to read it and enjoy it. And I do enjoy it, but regardless, this story made me think this is a thing that I think Brandon Sanderson would write. Or Brent Weeks, the guy who wrote the Lightbringer series. Did you guys get that sort of intuition from it?
A little bit. I know I used the blinding knife idea a little bit. Not purposely, just as I kind of came up with as, oh yeah, that's kind of like that. But
yeah, but it's kind of like an action-based, weird magic system style story, which I like.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with Brandon Sanderson except for how he botched. I mean, graciously finished Wheel of Time, but
yeah, that's kind of been my thought process as well. I didn't have a lot of information on him, but you know,
other than that, I haven't read any of his other books, but maybe I should.
Yeah. Who wrote Mistborn?
Brandon Sanderson.
See, I like that one.
Yeah.
The Mistborn, that was a real interesting magic system.
Yeah, and if people have read, it's really interesting. I won't give it away because I don't think Reed or Seth have read Warbreaker at all, but there's a lot of themes. If people are listening to this, they'll be like, yeah, sure, you were listening to it when you came up with your idea of your pantheon, and I swear I did not. It's like really kind of strangely similar, and I won't get into it because the magic system in Warbreaker is really complex and weird, but it's really interesting how I had this kind of weird idea for a pantheon and I came up with it, and then a couple days later I started to read this book which just kind of like did not the exact same thing, but a lot of similar elements, like giving and taking of power and stuff like that, which is really interesting to me. We just both had the same idea, it seems like, except his idea was years ago when he wrote the book, and my idea was before we started making this story. This just goes to show that I'm as good of an author as Brandon Sanderson.
At least 3 times as good.
Well, no, I'd say at least just as good. We can just come up with the same idea, but
well, I think that's just how it is. I mean,
next
as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun.
Next,
and I mean, we've done somewhat over 200, nearly 300 stories.
Yeah, 273. This is episode number 273 that we're recording right now. Eventually, we'll kind of get to the end, won't we? I think what I'd like to see us do, maybe we'll do this next year, is start taking all the stories we've written and start putting them into universes together. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah.
And so we can say beyond the shadow of a doubt that this story is all part of the same universe.
Right.
You know, especially maybe we'll make like a giant spreadsheet, not spreadsheet. What do you call it? A flow chart?
Yeah.
That would be cool.
I did enjoy that Seth started talking about, you know, the chakra and that stuff. And I had my story element was reoccurring character. And I picked Landon, the wise old man from the old sci-fi chakra, where we went 5 episods back last spring. That was sort of fun. That
5
happened.
Episodes?
Yeah, it was fun that, you know, we've done that oftentimes when we've, you know, we'll just come up with our story elements and then they'll just mesh together, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of strange how that works sometimes. Like I said, with me coming up with my story with the Pantheon and then starting to read Warbreaker and be like, how in the world were these things sort of together? I don't understand how that can happen.
Yeah.
But it does. I think that just goes to show that either we have a really, really, really strange universe or that's totally, completely random in every way, or we have an incredibly ordered universe that is helping things turn out.
Yeah.
It could be a little bit of both.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the very ordered could be very strange. I mean, it'd be more, the more you realize that all those things kind of line up. You think about if you go look at different like inventions, like when people invented the wheel,
Right.
lots of people came up with it nearly at the same time. Same thing with a lot of stuff, different things that are separated by, they wouldn't have had any contact as far as we know. And someone independently in kind of the same vein came up with some of the same conceptual ideas, with innovation,
That's like
around the same time, just on different areas.
That's like in the American auto industry, like by like the mid 70s, everybody seemed to forget how to make cars in exactly the same distorted way. And then everybody started buying Toyotas.
What do you mean they started to forget how to make
Well,
cars?
they were making cars like by the late 60s, the American car industry was putting together some pretty good equipment. And then like all the changes that came in the 70s were just wrong. And they were clunky looking. And then of course the different EPA standards were being introduced, so performance went out the window, and then people started buying Japanese cars because this is sick,
Right. It feels like sometimes there's like a natural order in which things would evolve or change,
Yeah.
It's like trees burn, forest fires happen because of lightning strikes and it burns the trees down, but that's kind of like nature's own forestry work.
Yeah.
And then we come along and we change things about forestry, and then we make trees grow, help trees grow much bigger or larger or more dense or different types of trees. Okay, here's a specific example. In the Twin Cities in Minnesota, they decided that there was a specific type of tree, and Reed will know what it is as soon as I start explaining it. So Reed just shouted out that they liked, and they thought, oh, this will be great. We'll only have one gender, right?
Oh, the elm trees.
I don't know if it was the elm trees. I think it was the cottonwoods. It's the ones that make the little white.
The fuzzies? Oh, yeah, that cottonwood.
Yeah, that's cottonwood.
Right? And so they just planted those, right? Which was like, okay, because they grew fast and they looked nice or something like that. But then during the spring, they would just explode. And there was no of the, I don't remember if they were the female or the male. I don't remember which ones they were, but there was none of the other kind. So there's just like this overabundance, and people were actually reporting higher levels of allergy.
Yeah.
Because nature was kind of knocked off balance. Or with the elms, we planted tons of elm trees so that when ash trees. Then when emerald ash borer came, the beetle, it just moved across the Twin Cities and just killed. I mean, I've got 2 dead ash trees in my yard right now,
Yeah.
It's like nature was trying to work a certain way, and then, you people come in and they sort of change how that nature is going to work. And sometimes you would say, quote unquote, it's for the betterment of society, because as not an invasive species, but as the dominant species on the planet, we kind of turn all of the world to our need, and there is some repercussion to that by not sort of understanding how nature works and sort of respecting that, or working with that. It's like the whole they had no Yellowstone National Park had 2 things that don't seem in any way connected. There were no wolves. They'd all been removed or killed, and their rivers were eroding, right?
Right.
And then they reintroduced wolves into their natural habitat. They started to hunt the deer. The deer stopped spending so much time down by the rivers and eating all the brush and all of the plant life down by the rivers, and they were much more cautious because of the wolves. And so the plant life grew back up by the rivers and were able to solidify the rivers and keep the rivers.
It was a complete taken by surprise. It was like that connection. The elk herds and the deer herds, they would just they instead of making a furtive trip quick down to get a quick drink between attacks of the apex predator, they could just hang out down there because there wasn't anybody to attack them.
Right.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it gets infinitely more complex.
Right.
It gets infinitely more complex when we talk about things like what causes this thing or that thing, And this is really a total aside from the story, but in some ways it's not, It's like these gods or these creatures had created a sort of balance, And if people had never found out about the giving and taking, this giving and taking power from the statues, society would have just moved on and they would have struggled with things, right? But it wasn't until they sort of realized that they could manipulate sort of nature and reality and themselves that things started to sort of tip off the edge, One of the realities that I wanted to sort of instill in the story was that the bad guy, this 11th, really was the one who kind of brought evil and fear and death. Maybe not death, but evil and fear.
Right.
And that he did that kind of afterwards, after the world had been created, after all these creatures had been made. Anyways, I really like the story a lot. I would probably definitely read the book if Robert Jordan wrote it, not if Brandon Sanderson wrote it, though.
I got lost off when I moved to Minneapolis in 1966. The South Minneapolis where I lived, the avenues were just lined with elm trees, and it was like a cathedral in the summer. These trees were shaped; they would come up and it would be pretty tall before they started branching, and then they would branch instead of flat out like an oak tree. They would branch like upward, and then they would arch. And like the streets were like shaded. They would plant on the boulevard.
Right.
The city had planted, and they grew up, and it was absolutely magnificent. But then Dutch elm disease came and started wiping them out, and then they started replacing them with ash. That's how that transition was. But neither the ash nor the elm were indigenous.
Right.
So then when they didn't have there was a time they said when you could go from Red Wing to about Minnesota to about where Buffalo, Minnesota is now, which is out west of the Twin Cities in the prairie. But it was like a giant hardwood forest. And you could, like a squirrel, could go from Winona to Buffalo without touching the ground, with beech and oak and the old growth forest. And then, of course, the settlers came and just started clearing land and farming it. But anyway, it would have been fun to see that forest back in, about 1600.
Absolutely.
There's a guy in Minnesota that has on his farm, like what they say is the largest oak tree in Minnesota is just this gigantic thing that's standing all by itself and, without other forest around it, just a tree in this guy's yard. And it's like, takes like 4 people with their hands clasped to get around it. It's like really tall.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Imagine that from Winona to Buffalo.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course, north from the hardwood forest gave way to the white pine, the old growth white pine that just covered the entire northeast part of the state before the logging.
I think somewhere up here they've got, I think what it's called, the Lost 40. There was like 40-acre section that got skipped over when they were logging. So apparently it's got all the old growth trees on it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
I think walking through the swamp today, and I don't know how old they are, but we came across some pretty big cedars. I think it might have taken, 2 of us might have been able to get our arms around it, but it might have taken all 3 of us.
But it kind of went afield. You got me off on the breeze.
Don't blame me.
Yeah.
You're the one who got distracted.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested, and I'll just tell you guys now, because you guys will hear it next week anyways, but I'm really excited because my story element for next week is sequel.
Ooh.
So we're not done with this place. And that's one of the reasons why I think I'm really excited about it, is that we're going to come back maybe right after, or maybe 100 years, or maybe, who knows, maybe instead of sequel, it'll be a prequel. I don't know. But anyways, do you guys have any other books that this reminds you of? Any other fun quips? Any interesting observations about this story? I thought that Haggai was a really good anti-hero.
Right.
He was really set up really well as a kind of could be a hero, but that whole thing was kind of taken away from him, All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better. We will hit you guys next week with a new story. Thanks so much. Bye.